get you to settle down a little bit. We part of our goal here at She Money is to put the fun into conversations about money and finance. And if this is your first time joining, welcome. I've been writing a newsletter on LinkedIn called She Money for, a few years now. And if you're not subscribed to that, we encourage you to. We do produce a monthly newsletter and all about women, money, and change. It's finance with a gender lens. So encourage you to sign up for that. And usually we haven't been doing monthly LinkedIn lives, but when we have an opportunity to talk with someone so amazing as Steph, we're doing them. I think our last one was with Carrie Schwab, a month ago, 2 months ago. So welcome, Steph. I'll introduce you in just a second. But this conversation was really initiated on the back of last month's newsletter, which was all about access to capital. And we actually had a live event in which Steph participated, where we brought together 7 amazing experts here in Utah and Salt Lake City to talk about all the different areas of financing and finding the right kind of capital for you to start, grow, and scale your business. So Steph actually contributed massively, and we'll post it in the chat, but we just released a pretty robust resource guide that you can find on shemoney.com, and Shay's going to post it in the chat, that really talks about the 4 areas of financing, the big bucket areas: grants, equity, debt, and what we call alternative financing. And Steph and others really contributed to these worksheets, which you can find the resource there or download the PDFs. Because finding the right kind of capital is super hard. And we're going to talk about that with Steph, because it's actually the reason she started Fundid. So with that, let me just say welcome, settle in for an hour conversation with Steph. And I would like you to meet the amazing Steph Sample, the founder and CEO of Fundid. Welcome, Steph, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So I thought, let's start with your backstory, Steph, because I think one of the many things we love about you, and, it's always why you started Fundid, but take us back a little bit to the beginning of your sort of journey in business, because you are an entrepreneur and you've started many businesses and have so much wisdom that you've garnered along the way in terms of your own experience. And of course, they're bringing that forward into Fundid, which is a venture capital funded business. So we'll get into that later. But start back at a little bit at the beginning and sort of your journey into entrepreneurship and business ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I've always been an entrepreneur. At first, I thought maybe something was wrong with me that I didn't fit into the normal world. It's kind of taken me 17 years of doing this entrepreneur journey to be like, oh no, I'm just programmed differently. But I started my first company out of college, a bag company actually for marathoners, and didn't know anything. Like it was a classic, I made this bag that I was working on, like kind of on the side of some stuff. I took it to one of my professors from college and I was like, hey, do you think people would buy this? And he's like, absolutely, you should go sell them. And I made them specifically for marathon runners. But so I maxed out. I had an Alaska credit card with a $7,500 limit. I maxed it out to buy an expo booth at the Las Vegas Marathon. I got 2 of my best friends at the time, plane tickets with me to go down there and try to launch this business. Pretty much learned anything and everything the hard way in that journey. But it was such an amazing experience that I just kept going. So from there, I've gone on to kind of do a little bit of everything in business. I've been in franchising, purchased a business to kind of do a digital transformation. I've sold businesses. I've, started them from scratch. And now I'm in a venture-backed company. So it almost looks like maybe my journey is that I'm trying to do one of everything in every single kind of entrepreneur class before I retire. But I love entrepreneurship. I specifically love small business ownership. I think it's such an amazing path for people, and it's all learnable. That's always what I like to emphasize about my journey in my past is there is no reason I have been successful. I didn't go to Stanford or Harvard, or I'm just an eager learner. I'm ambitious, and anyone with that attitude can be successful in business.
I love how you say that. I say that too. I mean, I think people know I ended up at Goldman Sachs, but I grew up in a very small town in Canada, went to with a great school, Grant University of British Columbia, but ended up with a career in finance. And it's not prescriptive, and I think one of the biggest things we can do, and what we're doing today when we talk about money and capital and pathways, is to know that there isn't and nothing's set in stone. And I love what you said about having ideas and a work ethic, obviously. And I know for me personally, there's definitely a luck factor, but
Totally.
luck is easier with hard work and ambition, is kind of what I always say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just to start, just because I'm curious, I actually recently met with, kind of back to where you started. Because when you think of the gamut of businesses, and feel free to post in the chat again, like questions that you have coming into this, what type of business owner you are, what are some of the barriers that you faced in accessing capital, and specific questions, and we'll pull them in throughout the session together. But what I found, and just as background, I think this, Steph, I've invested direct investments in 20 plus companies and a lot of funds, and now I'm a founder of a startup too. But on that path, and we've had lots of events, I know you've attended them here in Utah with various business owners. It's just the different types of businesses and finding the right kind of capital for the type of business that you're trying to start. So in your first journey, and you'll often hear, don't fund on a credit card because, it's high interest rate, obviously can be dangerous money. And yet you did. And I think I've read in one of the articles that you said you did it via credit card and you would do it again. But share a little bit more about that story, and even from your experience, and we'll bridge forward into Fundid in a little bit. But just that journey and how a lot of businesses are started, in your opinion, because if you don't have personal resources to fund a business, which most people don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was me, if I think even further back, I did a knitting class in college that I didn't know how to fund. And I just called up and asked the yarn company, I know this sounds super silly, if they would let me pay them after my customers paid me. And they said yes. So I think in finance, being willing to just ask for what you need is kind of important, because everything's negotiable. But yeah, my first business was definitely on a credit card. So ultimately it became bootstrapped and customer paid. The lucky part of that business, and to think about if you don't have capital to invest in a business, it's actually pretty important to think about business models then where you can support that business growing through your customers' money, right? It's if you don't have the capital and it's not venture fundable and it's not bankable, it is important for it to be something where the customers can fund it. And I had that because the bags I was actually selling a cardboard tube. And then those people would fill it with their race memorabilia, send it to me, and then I'd make the custom bags. So if you think about it, I was given a flow, right? I had until they actually sent me that to buy the materials and everything. That was lucky. I didn't know to think like that. That was just luck. Eventually, I was able to get a line of credit for that business. And I hear about using lines of credit a lot. And even as someone's first option, and I really like to emphasize now, a line of credit is not a good first option. It's pretty much like a credit card. You should go for a term loan way ahead of a line of credit, because it's pretty expensive capital too. But ultimately I funded that business off of, I got a really big brand in the US, a big running store, to make a purchase for 60,000 bags. And I got them to pre-purchase those. And that essentially funded the rest of the life of that company. And I was just really smart with that capital. It's very different than where I am today with venture capital. I thought of that money I got as the only money I was ever going to get for this business. And so I spent it that way. If anything, me switching to being on the venture side has been really hard, because I've always been a small business owner and you spend money so differently. Other businesses I funded in a lot of different ways. One that is always interesting to people is being in the franchise space. Mm-hmm. I'm in 2 different brands. One we've been in for a long time and we're still in, and it's a very fundable brand. It's Taco Bell. Banks love Taco Bell. They're very predictable and fundable. And then I was in another brand that was newer, and something that I didn't know to think about too, but now I would, is that when you get into franchising, there's a lot of brands out there that are SBA pre-approved, which is a big deal for someone that wants to be a business owner, because what that means is that the SBA, the government-backed lender, has already looked at that franchise concept and model and deemed it a viable business model. And they're essentially saying, as long as the person meets the minimum qualifications, we'll give them the money to open up this business concept. So that's important for two reasons. One, if you don't have personal finances to get into a business, getting into an SBA approved brand, franchise brand, is a good path. But two, if a brand is SBA pre-approved, you probably could have a better like gut feeling that you're going to be able to make money. Like, it's another thing, like looking at brands that aren't SBA pre-approved. It's like, wait, does this thing not make money? And being concerned. So the SBA has been a big route. I've also done traditional commercial loans, which are the best kind of loans you could get with banks. And it's funny because there's like so many alternative lenders out there now that it seems like we almost default to them now. But it's really important for business owners to remember that the best interest rate you could get, the best loan you could get, is always going to be through a bank, a commercial loan, and then probably an SBA. So it is still important to start there. And that's mostly how I've funded my businesses, is through just direct commercial loans, using assets. I've mostly felt fortunate that my businesses have been models that are asset-based so that they're lendable in a commercial space. And then today I'm in venture, which just means I took out outside private capital to build my business model, because the model should be scalable in a way that would have a massive return. But it also means it's not very asset-based, because the truth is if I could have built Fundid and the business model itself had assets that I could leverage for a bank loan, I would have taken that route, because venture is like very risky. I'm very passionate about this topic, that as someone that cares about it, you know, in a lot of ways, I shouldn't even take venture because it's putting my mission at risk. But it's a kind of model that is very scalable and doesn't have a lot of assets. So the bank isn't really interested in lending to technology companies. That was a lot. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have 4 million questions, you know, embedded in that pathway. But it sort of strikes to, you know, and I'll just end with an observation based on what you said. And it's sort of, as for the opening of this, finding the right kind of capital and understanding the cost of capital, and cost by how I'm using it as either the interest rate you're paying to borrow that money to fund your business, or as you said with venture, what are you giving up, right? What is, how much of your business are you giving up, the cost of that capital in terms of ownership in your business. And that's what I find, like, personally, like, I think about the business we're starting all the time. And as you said, if you can be a revenue-based business, meaning having your customers pay for you to pay yourself and grow and scale your business, that's the best kind of capital, because obviously you're not paying an interest rate on that. And you're not giving up anything. So, you know, if I had a heck yes, you know, I'd be holding it up to revenue-based financing, because that is actually how a lot of businesses start. But to your point, you know, like, understanding, you might have a great business idea, and understanding how to figure out what options are even available to you to fund that business, assuming, you know, whether it's, like you said, a line of credit, a commercial loan, credit card, you know, weighing out all those options is just so critical before you even start that business. So let's maybe pull in a little bit about, because that's kind of why you started Fundid, right? So, I mean, I have the mission written down, but I'm sure you know it by heart. But I translate that, and we'll be pulling in some questions soon. So keep posting them in the chat. But why did you start, you know, Fundid? And let me just make it back up. Started your own company, Taco Bells, had Massage Envies, had a couple other businesses in here, and you were doing really well. And you're like, no, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. Not stop, but sort of put that to the side in order to be a venture capital backed business called Fundid. So why this business for you?
Yeah, it's a good question that I ask myself a lot too. Because I like love small business. I built Fundid around small business, and now I'm in venture, but my heart is still in small business ownership. So, With Funded, it was an interesting time in my life, which we should consider, right? In businesses, is our natural cycle of our life impacts what we build, why we build it. There's good times to do different things. And for me, going into the pandemic, I just sold my Massage MDs to one of the larger franchisees in the brand. I had just spent 7 years in that brand. It was 7 hard years. I learned pretty much everything the hard way. It was a very hard brand to operate. At the labor, the thing that we were selling was people's time. That was really tricky. So I came out of that feeling pretty tired, and I had a bunch of other things on the side. I actually had a whole nother company called the Insight Studio on the side of that. And then the pandemic hit. And so I really went into everything not knowing what I was going to do next, which creates a lot of stress for me. I don't know if other people feel that way on here, but I meet these people who could just take 6 months off work and float around and be like, oh, I'll figure out. And I'm not that. So I went into this super stressed. I didn't know what I was doing next and was trying to figure it out. And I also felt this pressure to do something next because a lot of my identity, good or bad, is as a business owner. And as a female, I don't know why, but whenever I have downtime, I feel like, oh my God, people are going to forget I'm a business owner or something. I don't know. I'm a broken person, like many of us. So in this time, I was sitting on a bank board and seeing how banks really cater to the top 1% of their clients. So at these bank board meetings, which is a terrific bank, and I love it. But, we spend our time talking about the best clients and how to fund them, not the small businesses. The pandemic was going on. And so there were articles in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, essentially about how women and minorities were being left out of the PPP funding, which was so critical to help small business. There was just this feeling in the air that no one really cared about small businesses and the tight budgets they really operated on. But specifically, it felt during the pandemic very much like women were just getting punched in the face over and over. It was you're trying to operate a business and all of a sudden you're doing Zoom school and all this other stuff. And women were dropping out of the workforce. And it sent me down this rabbit hole of just being what is happening in small business, specifically for women and underserved people? Why is this happening? And what can I do? And there was just this morning, I think it was in October of 2020, where a Wall Street Journal article came out. And then the next email I opened was a newsletter by Jessie Draper of Halogen Ventures about how—
I love Jessie Draper.
Yeah. I don't even know her, but I talk about her all the time.
I know her. I'll introduce you. I just talked to her last week.
I love her newsletters.
She's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and she did an article on how venture funding decreased during COVID, which I'm sure we're seeing right now, specifically to women. And I just had this moment of clarity where I looked at my husband and was I'm not going to be on the sidelines on this. The world needs people to step up and try to be part of the solution. And I'm at a point in my career where I can start focusing on my passions, not just being a business owner, which I think all business owners go through. At some point, how to start a business, how to operate it, how to make it profitable. And you transition in life and you're oh, now I have a platform to do something more meaningful. And I was just kind of there where I wanted to make sure that whatever I did next had a great impact. And I didn't mean to start Funded. I really put it out to my network that, this is really frustrating to me. I really care about the smallest businesses getting funding. I don't understand why the world works this way. I don't have a solution. I'm just all ears wanting to learn. So whoever has opinions, please schedule time with me. And I ended up, I think I had 50 meetings over 2 weeks from really intelligent people in this space, bank presidents, people in fintech. And I just kept asking questions and then kind of playing with ideas, bringing it back to them. And it was I accidentally started Funded. All of a sudden, I had heard Well, to help the smallest businesses, you have to do it at scale because the margin's really low. And that's how I accidentally made it venture backable. And then it was like, small businesses are really hard to reach. So you have to prove that you could do it more efficiently. And I've always been really good at marketing and SEO research. And I realized that a lot of these small businesses thought that they didn't qualify for anything. So they searched for grants. And yet business grants are kind of a disaster on the web. And so I organized a really nice grant marketplace that people can like search through, and I put that up, and that immediately started converting. And so like it was like I accidentally created a good engine to surface the businesses, and I just kept following like the solution. But where we really landed was we wanted to simplify how the smallest businesses understood and accessed capital, specifically businesses with under 10 employees, because we realized it represented 98% of all women-owned businesses, but really it represents the vast majority of all businesses, yet very little content is created specifically for those super tiny businesses. And we focused on being education first and then a connector second. So our platform, we really focus on helping businesses understand the different types of capital and then connecting them to potential solutions for them to go and apply for. But we're just a helpful platform. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you for that backstory. And, I so agree with you. Like, I'm really aware. I think you are too. Like, I'm really try to be very intentional. And actually, we created here in Utah, I know you know this, Steph, but a guide when we launched She Money called Spend, which I wish was in every city, everywhere. And the idea is this intentional consumerism and how you're using your purchasing power in alignment with your values and what you care about. And I think we all care about living in vibrant communities where, there's, the dry cleaner and the restaurant and the nail salon and the cute little, Chatsky store that I always buy stuff in, and the clothing store. And when you really pay attention, you see that, and I think we noticed it during the pandemic when so many of these businesses closed, that the vibrancy of a community is based on having access to that. And when we support them, of course, the wealth creation that those people are in our communities, providing for themselves and their families. And we really noticed when we created our spend guide, as you said, the vast majority of these types of businesses that are the 0 to 10, 1 to 10 people, solopreneurs and up to that scale, are women and minority-owned businesses. And that's part of the challenge too, right? Because we want more women founding, like you are, businesses that are scalable, that are changing the nature of business and industry, that are the next, that Fundid is the next, a unicorn, those are all great. And there's the reality of where people are now. And if those businesses are successful, as in your story, you start something, then it leads to something or else. And if it doesn't, it's a beautiful business that serves the community, that makes communities rich and thrive. So I really want to honor, and I think Shay just posted, we'll post some resources about the importance of small business and medium-sized business. And let's just stay there for a minute, because I know I really care about that. And to your experience, after those 50 calls and what's available on the platform, talk a little bit about, so you don't have the personal money. How do you start that business, right? And you've already given some tips around that, if it can be revenue based, but if you need to sign a lease or install a kitchen or, and more in the context of the access to capital piece, assuming you can figure out how to do it, the funding piece of that, and sort of connect that into, as you said, SBA loans, which are very understood. I know you have tons of resources on the website, but talk a little bit, let's talk to that demographic, someone just starting a small business, and then let's move up the ladder a little bit in terms of access to capital to cover, all our bases in terms of the different types of capital and how that's the right kind of capital for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a good question. Like starting a small business, it takes money. Like it's just like, and time. Like time is like maybe even the bigger factor if you need to keep your day job and starting a small business. And there's a few things that come to mind. One, I have just learned so much the last 2 years in serving this community that isn't something I always knew either. So I'll share some of that. If you think you want to be a small business owner, start working on your personal credit score right away. No one told me my personal credit score would matter. Especially in this new economy we all live in, the idea of getting a loan without a personal guarantee is almost non-existent anymore. And it always kind of has been. Like, even things we don't think of, like a lot of people don't think SBA loans have personal guarantees. They absolutely do. You're almost always leveraging your personal home or your business. So work on your personal credit score. Even if you think you're going to start a business in 10 years, like, be aware of it, use credit building products. Think of your personal financial life very much as a reflection of what will happen in your business financial life. In addition to that,
I'm just going to put an exclamation mark around that, because even in all the workshops we're doing, and I didn't understand, I was like, oh, even finance gal, I walk into Athleta, here, get another credit card because you get points off or whatever. And I didn't really understand how you build a credit score, what to be mindful of, being mindful of not closing down accounts, about paying off things on time. So I just want to put a gigantic exclamation mark behind understanding credit and how to build your credit score. And that we're going to create a guide on that. And I think you might have one on your site as well. But that is just a humongous exclamation mark from She Money over here.
Yeah, I love it. And I know you've talked about this too, personal savings, if that's an option, like starting a savings account. I think I was an early user of Ellevest. I loved how they had savings accounts as part of their platform that you could create for like a home or something. But for a business too, trying to put money into savings, I know that's really hard. It's hard for me to save. Like, I get that. And that's why I like the Ellevest platform for savings. It was kind of out of sight, out of mind for me. And so I would like put money over there, invest it in the market, and I consider that like a savings account for something like a business, right? And then, like I said, franchise models that are SBA pre-approved, super important if you don't have money to start a business. Investors are great too. One of the things I think of when starting a business is that oftentimes if we don't have capital to start a business, we think really, really small about the business we're going to start then. That's actually not necessarily the best path if you don't have the capital. If anything, someone is going to like shoot me for saying this in the venture world. If you don't have money, build something venture backable, because that's someone else's money. Like, literally, you put in like, I always joke, like, because I'm like 15 years in and now in the venture backable world. And so how other founders talk, I'm like, oh my God, I've never done anything in my life where I'm not personally on the line, not, on the hook, and I'm getting a paycheck for building it. Sure, it's like, it has to be very ambitious and stuff, but the truth is I didn't personally put any money into Fundid. It's the first time I've never put money into one of my businesses, and it's venture backable. So it's like, instead of thinking really, really small, maybe actually think really, really big, and do something venture scalable. It's a great way to learn and experiment. There's a lot of really big problems out there in the world to solve. So like, I don't know, I feel like think really big, or think the other one I think that's really interesting.
Can I just stop you on that one for a minute, because that is a very interesting point. And I have such mixed feelings on that, honestly. But I hear what you're saying, because if you have, and I'll give you an example. My most successful business I've ever invested, of the 25 companies, was my second one. It was called LearnVest. And it was this woman named Alexa Von Tobel. I know we've talked about her. She is a rock star. She dropped out of Harvard, we happened to get an introduction to her. And this was in 2008 or 9, I think. And she had this idea for a business that was a business plan, and about LearnVest, Learn, Earn, Invest, a platform for financial education and engagement. Long story short, we invested in her. I don't think she put any, to your point, she put a sweat equity in her own labor. until she got money. And of course, generally speaking, you don't pay yourself a big salary at the beginning. But she grew and scaled that business, and she sold it, I think, and it was a private transaction to Northwest Mutual, but I think it was in the paper or whatever at the time, for north of $300 million. I think it was 8 years later. And now she's a venture capitalist herself with Inspired Capital. And she had, and I've seen lots of those plans, so I want to say yes. And you have a great idea, you have confidence in execution, like all the things, and we have, in our equity financing, cheat sheet, how to know, to your point, whether a business is venture scalable. But the opposite side of that, even though like, heck yes, if you have a great idea and go for it, is the fact that women founders receive less than 2% of venture capital dollars. So, and you did receive it, so we can talk about that. But I just want to say, I love that, and yes. And there's still systemic issues around women accessing capital and a lot of bias, right? And I'm just curious, before we sort of backtrack for a minute, in your journey to raise venture capital with Fundid, did you experience that? And I mean, I'm sure we could do a whole hour on that with, I know sure. Artemis is one of your investors. We know them well, a women-owned VC firm. But just pause for a minute to say, how was that journey for you? Because you took your own advice and did it. And obviously, I think you received, I think you said $7 million in venture capital financing to date.
Yeah, I hear this a lot. It's so funny. You become a female founder, which I didn't even know what the word founder meant. I still am a little confused about it. I'm like, I think I'm just an entrepreneur, a business owner. But now, because I'm in venture, I get this new title. And as soon as you become a founder and you're a female, all of a sudden, everyone on earth sends you these articles that are essentially like, you shouldn't get money. And you're like, oh God, like, what did I get into?
But I did.
Yeah. So for me, what was interesting is I had a fantastic experience raising. I was super prepared. Instead of being a victim, because that sounds such like kind of like bullshit language, but I was like, okay, I'm going to play this game with the cards I've been dealt. They're shitty cards, right? Like the numbers aren't on my side, but like this is the game, and I have something that I really care about that I want to get funded. And so I have to be more prepared. My deck has to be more dialed. My data room has to like not miss anything. I have to do so much research. I have to make sure my vision's big enough. Like I really like got my ducks in a row early on. And there are so many female founders out there, me included, that would like pretty much drop anything to help another aspiring female founder figure all this out and learn all of this. Like we're a tribe now. We're all helping each other. We're getting super dialed. And VCs are noticing. Like I got comments all the time, like I've never seen a better data room in my life. Or, like VCs notice, male or female. I got amazing support when I was raising. There's so many really fantastic VCs out there too. And they aren't just looking for like females to add to their portfolio. They're looking for great leaders, great business owners. And they recognize an aspiring great business owner when they see it. So if you have your ducks in a row, the money is out there. The numbers suck. I would almost say just don't look at them because it's not helpful to know how hard it is. Rely on other female founders for the introductions because they know all the great VCs. All those other VCs not funding females, I mean, they should just die, right? Like those funds hopefully will die and fail, and we could all like have a party when it happens.
Hey, yes, success breeds success. And to your point, if women, there's this quote I love: if ever in the history of the world, if there comes a point in time when women come together purely for the good of humanity, it'll be the force the world has never seen. And it was by this guy named Matthew Arnold in like 1847. And I'm like, what does this do? And I was like, look at this context. But I love what you said there because I both, the numbers really piss me off. And on the other hand, you can't let the numbers necessarily let yourself be a statistic, around that. And Letty, thank you, Letty Velez, sorry, I don't have my glasses on, pointed out, and I've written a whole article about this. I'm going to invite Shay to point out that women receive less than 2%, women of color less than 0.2%. of venture capital.
Awful.
And yeah, it's awful. And that's why I've made it a personal priority to invest in funds like Walkstar Fund, Tracy Gray 22 funds, and actually Equity Alliance, and again, on this resource guide, you can find a link that we've produced, She Money, that will put you into a list of venture capital funds that invest with a gender and racial equity lens, because, and my theory of change on that, and Artemis is obviously on that list as well, to say if we invest in funds that are more likely to invest in women and people of color, that is how change happens. People putting their money where their values are, creating community and accountability, buying the products and services from these companies so that they are successful, so that they are the next scalable businesses. So seeing that theory of change and feeling like you have a part, whether your part is buying the product or service, or if you're like me, a high net worth woman, I have the capacity to invest in founders and invest in funds. And that is how change happens.
Yes.
Right? And it doesn't happen by complaining and doing nothing. It happens by acknowledging and doing something.
Yeah, getting in the game is so important. And like I said, I had a great experience once I was in, and I am mostly funded by funds that are like male GPs, and they've been excellent. They haven't treated me any differently. They, be a great business owner and you'll get money. The other thing too is it's with all the data out there, it's really easy to come into the venture world as a female or a minority and be kind of nervous and scared. And, raising money is a sales process. Confidence is important. You might see I have just a little bit of confidence. And I think that that's important too. So even like I did a public speaking course going into raising. I got feedback. I like intentionally was confident, even though on the inside, I'm not always confident. And that helps. But when you read the data too much, it's really easy to feel like horrible or go in scared or assume things or then even project them. That's like, just don't read the data, be confident as hell and go ask, go try. Who cares? Like if you don't raise money, you don't raise money. But like, I just want like, I tell like all my friends right now, I'm like, you should just like try a venture funded company. You should just try to go through that process because it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I want to pull us back to, some businesses like that in that middle that aren't necessarily venture fundable. And the counter narrative to that as an investor is, I would say the vast majority of my companies, and I'm often first check-in, including a recent experience, and you are accountable. And I know you're saying this, but I just want to anchor, you are accountable for other people's money, and you don't know if that's the only 50,000 that person is ever going to put into a company. And based on their experience with you, they do it again or not do it again. But you are accountable. And I think and I know you are, so I'm not saying that, but I say go do it. But it is other people's money and life savings, and to treat it really responsible. And I had a recent company, that it was the most horrific experience by a founder that, in my view, should be embarrassed, based on her behavior as a founder. Like, it just makes me so upset. And I'm going to keep investing in companies. But I know some of the other investors who said, my experience with her makes me never want to invest in this way again. So I think, and I don't speak publicly. I won't tell that story of that founder publicly. But the damage that she has done by the way she conducted herself is, in my mind, just beyond my understanding, beyond. So I think there is that balance. And I know, and that's one of 25 companies. Companies go under for good reason. But that accountability and your reputation, is, and again, I'm not saying you're not saying that, but I want to be the counter of like, yeah, go for it. But also realize that taking other people's money is not a panacea either. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
Being a fiduciary is a lot of responsibility. I think it's one that women actually take on better than men, like based on data, not just like my how I view it, because it's so much harder for us to raise money that we then like treat it So it's like, yeah, you had a bad experience. There's a lot of really horrible founders out there that have no business being in the game. So hopefully like one experience doesn't ruin it for others. But I feel that responsibility a lot. It is something that I wasn't prepared for when I got into venture. But sometimes the pressure of succeeding as a female is really exhausting, because you do feel the pressure of representing like a bigger group of people, not just yourself. I enjoy the responsibility. I believe, like, you know, we have one life. We should try to have an impact, try to have change. And having responsibility as a female founder is a great way to make that impact. I wanted to say one more business model because I just love it for people that don't have capital to invest.
Yes, please.
It's never talked about. Buy an existing business. Oh my God. All day, every day. Like, don't start a business. Like, if anything, like people that come to me with businesses, I'm like, just go buy a business that does that already. It has revenue. It's bankable. The bank's going to give you capital to buy that business. Like, it cash flows already. I think it's like the best way to become a business owner, to build wealth really quickly. And so you need capital to do that too. There's this asset class that I think is so overlooked. I've been like preaching it now for a year, called search funds or entrepreneur through acquisition. There's like 3 funds right in Salt Lake City, but they're all over the country. You could Google search funds, entrepreneur by acquisition. My favorite fund is Peterson Search, where they literally back entrepreneurs to go out and buy an existing business for an equity stake in that business. I think it's probably the best way, specifically for women and minorities, to become CEOs of $10 million plus profitable businesses that could have an enormous impact on the way those companies are also run to keep women and minorities in the workforce. So go Google that one as an option.
Yeah, I would love to get that resource. I'm sure it's on. And we never talk about that. And I'll tell you why what showed up for me is you answered that question. How do I find those businesses? And how do I purchase them? Like demystifying that process, especially if it's a solid revenue business. I'm just curious I might be going into the reads here, but I'm curious for existing businesses, because it's also an exit. Like if you own a business, right? Like how do I ever get out of that business? I'm tired of running the cantina or, the women's clothing store down the street. So it's also the other side. Maybe you want to move on to something else, but you don't know how to value your business. So there's both sides of that. But, I wouldn't have thought to ask you about that, Steph. So we'll get the resources around that, but maybe say it one more time and we can make sure that Shay, did you have it captured, Shay? She does. Okay.
I put it in the private chat. There's a go-to site called searchfund.org. It's the go-to site to understand this space. I also linked to Peterson Partners. They might get mad at me for getting bombarded, but that's okay. I think if I could have done things differently, I would have purchased my first company through a search fund if I had heard of it or known what it was. And we're in a time where there's so many boomers out there with businesses to sell, that are profitable, good, solid businesses. So it's my favorite path to entrepreneurship. That
is brilliant. And you don't hear that talked about. So I'm pulling in a question from the chat, and I have a friend who has this issue too. So I have a business and I use my credit card to fund inventory, to fund equipment, perhaps because they couldn't get a bank loan. And you talked about personal guarantees, but talk a little bit about those, like the best. And we have a ton of resources around sort of the debt and grant, but let's talk about debt for a minute. Then we'll talk about grants for a minute. And if we have time, alternative financing. But talk a little bit about sort of like this credit card versus, SBA versus commercial loan. And again, how do you balance those? And if you have any tips, especially, and we're not talking about necessarily starting a business, but an ongoing business, but not a big one.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, credit cards should always be a last resort. I was in that category. I was in a last resort category. I had no other options. I mean, I almost like would have gone back to school and enrolled in a class just to get a student loan to start my business, which I don't know that I'm recommending. I'm just saying, like, desperate
We're all
times,
laughing
right?
here. Like, no, I don't think you should.
um so at the live event we just had, there was a lot of people talking about how there is some pretty interesting credit cards out there. Like Zion Bank had a new card with no interest for like a year or something. So if you do have credit card debt, it is like important to play the game, if I'm allowed to say that. Like, balance transfers to cards that don't make you pay interest for a year, or consolidating all of your debt, trying to take all your cards to a consolidator, trying to figure out a path to getting a real loan is also important. I've been there. It's stressful. It's hard. But you also have to make just like crazy good business decisions. I think when your credit card debt gets crazy, and if the business model isn't paying off, I don't know that I believe in this like push forward at all costs mindset. I think good business owners, good investors know when to unemotionally call it. I've called it with businesses where it was like getting too expensive, costing too much, having to use all these weird resources, and just focusing on paying them off and no longer going forward. I know that's horrible advice. No one wants to hear that. So it's like, just ignore me for that couple of minutes if you don't want to hear that. After that, I think that there's all sorts of alternative lending options out there today that used to not exist. And that pop up every day. So maybe like 2 years ago when you started your business, you thought there's like no option for me. There's only credit cards. That might not be true today. Like yesterday, a new fintech might have launched that specifically does inventory for Shopify companies, right? Shopify is now lending, Stripe's lending. There's so many options out there. And that's one of the things we're focusing on at Fundid now, is like trying to help consolidate the best lending options by like industry. Like if you are an e-commerce business, what are the lenders specific to e-commerce? So when you go to search for lending alternatives, I think we're in a good time in the world to search really specifically like lending options for e-commerce Shopify businesses for inventory, or like I'm a service-based business. I invoice my customers and they pay in 30 days. That's invoice factoring. And there are companies that will float you that 30 days, or like essentially like when you send the invoice, you could get the capital that day instead of when the customer pays. Like everything. I mean, innovative ideas pop up every day, but I'm like amazed by how much actually exists out there. That when I was just a small business owner, when I wasn't in fintech, I just assumed weren't things. Like, in fact, all these ideas I had on how to solve this problem, like 90% of them actually existed already. I just didn't know about them. So searching like very specifically for alternatives, I think, is important. And then making sure you have that financial path to this not being a forever problem. I know a lot of us didn't know finance when we got into business. I know I didn't. I watched so many YouTube videos to learn QuickBooks. Taking responsibility for our finances as business owners and not relying on just accountants to solve it. It's important. Like understanding our path is just so important, because no one really cares as much as we do.
Yeah, I love saying that. And it is personal self-care. And I just was actually with a business owner from one of our businesses, which is my go-to now if I'm looking for a product or service. And she's one of the business owners. And I asked her those questions, about personal finance. Like, do you care for your, she owned this beautiful business, but do you have emergent, and she was open to talking about it. Obviously, I wasn't just pounding her with questions, but I said, would you like to talk more personally about your financial situation? She goes, I would love to. And I was like, do you have an emergency savings plan? She's like, well, what tips? Like, what are the basics? I feel so intimidated. I have my business and I'm pouring all my money into my business. But, do I mortgage my house to buy equipment? Like all these trade-offs, because at the end of the day, money is trade-offs. You get something now to give it up in the future, or oppositely, you buy something now to not have money in the future. And I think every day we are making so many financial decisions, and to bring intention and awareness to those financial decisions that, like you said earlier, maybe by not, and I'm not really a deprivation person, I don't think that frame is helpful, but if you think you might have a business one day, to put, $100, however much you can afford, in a separate account, to say, this is my exit plan, this is my business one day account, to forego whatever you would use that $100 for, if you even have excess capital, is key. And she was saying, I don't think about my personal finances because I'm so busy building my business. And that's, again, what I know what you're trying to do. We're doing She Money here with, how we are talking about people thinking about money in all these different areas, is to bring that attention and awareness. And to your point, we're not taught this, and I think so many people start businesses because they're passionate about something, or they inherited, they just start small and then it gets bigger. And then there's you just don't have time. And like you said, the context changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Fundid, when I was digging around on your platform, even with our business, and let's talk about grants for a couple minutes and then wind up. And I'll introduce a couple questions, but things change every day. And just because you couldn't get money 2 years ago, doesn't mean you couldn't get it today. And that's why platforms, and why I wanted to have this call with you, Steph, is incredible to be able to go to one place. And I know you have Hello Alice and I Fund Women. I'm invested actually in both those companies, that you're aggregating these resources together to make it easier for people to find solutions. So I'm just celebrating that. So let me ask you a question about grants, because grants are free money. We talk about it in the context of non-dilutive capital. If you can get free money that you don't have to pay back with interest, or with, giving away part of your company, I mean, heck yes, right?
Yes.
So give us your overall little bit of perspective on grants. The fact that you aggregate them is huge. And what I've heard from business owners who've sort of said yes, but is it takes a lot of time, they're small, and I'm not at all sure it's worth it. So give a high level on the whole area of grants, especially if you're a woman or a BIPOC founder, because a lot of them are targeted.
Yeah, they're very specific.
So talk a little bit about this.
Totally.
Look at the questions and hopefully wing in a couple in the last few minutes too.
Absolutely. So grants are really interesting because one, the reason we built our grant marketplace, which maybe we can link to in the notes, it's just available for free right on our website. You don't have to create a login or anything. And all we do is consolidate them all. We don't make money off of any of our grants. We're not co-branding them. We're just trying to be like, here they are. And even us, when we find them all and list them, we're like, wow, these are like really specific. And I heard someone joking, like, it feels like I can't get a grant if I'm not like, ethnically diverse, female, who only like has a business that operates on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. or, just exaggeration, of course, but it can sometimes feel that way. And so, for us, we think about grants in two ways. There's government grants and then there's private grants. The private grants is a tricky market. If someone wants to build a business around solving this, I think it's a good idea. I don't think it's venture fundable, but I'm actually I'm annoyed at this point, the way the private markets are trying to monetize grants by getting like big corporates to pay them to facilitate these grants only to their communities. And it's just like, come on, guys, like this is supposed to be something that's like philanthropic. So private grants are really tricky. I want to like be able to sit here and be like, everyone should go apply for them. They're amazing. I feel like it's like winning the lottery. We try to compare it to like applying for scholarships in college. Those we like generally knew we might be able to get. We had a percentage likelihood. Grants feel like maybe you should go buy a lottery ticket instead of apply for a grant, is how I feel about it. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that out loud. Government grants, on the other hand, are a lot more straightforward and direct. They generally have very clear requirements. If you meet those requirements, you could generally get the grant. The most common one that I see is a lot of like the economic development departments within every state has like I don't know what they call them. Like all of the states have different ones, but it's essentially the job creation grant. We had it for several of our businesses in Montana, where it was like we were getting $7,500 for every new job we created, as long as that new job paid like over $20 an hour, and they stayed on with us. And at first it was like, wow, this is great. Like that's free money. But something to consider in taking those kind of grants is it was actually a lot of labor and time to do the reporting on them. And then it was like, if that person left for whatever reason, now you owe them money, and you're like, oh no, like you could become like indebted to the government for this grant too. There is like some politics in those grants where the economic development groups putting them out actually get paid by you getting it. So then you have to pay them a fee because you got it through them, which to me just feels like, ugh. And then like, it always feels like the biggest companies that are the loudest, like get these big grants through the government like that. And sometimes small businesses are left out. So like, those are some of my annoyances with the grant space. There's so much room for improvement in it. The applications feel very subjective still. Like we're in like 2023, like where data is so easy to get, that I feel like these grants should be data driven. And hopefully in the future, we see that you go in, you connect all your data, and it like gives you an outcome. I will say, you know, we are in a time of generative AI. If you are applying for grants, apply with ChatGPT. Take the question, link to your business's website, and like create an automated response. Like there's tools now in using AI to help you answer those questions efficiently. So if you are being asked a bunch of subjective questions and you are taking the time to apply for grants, you know, it's like play the game too. Have something that doesn't cost a lot of time and money help you with your answers. But it like clearly is a hard topic for me though, because it's a big part of our website. And I'm also like kind of annoyed with the grant process in the US.
Well, and I feel like it can be, I think there can be an uber local component to this too, because I think what I'm finding, and I'm just going to wrap us up. I wish I had another hour with you, but just on that point, you know, on grants, because what I see, and we're, I think, in a great community that is in Salt Lake. You know, we're coming together with Connect Capital, with local VC, with the women in small business community here to say, how do we really do things and help execute them in a local way that makes it a lot more accessible. I think, you know, at a macro level, when you start to go national, things can be so much more challenging. But I want to encourage everyone to check out Fundid. And again, you know, I think of all the people we could have had, it feels, I'm just grateful to you, Steph, for creating this platform and demystifying. I spent a lot of time on your website. There are incredible resources there. And as you said, it's just going to get better and better, because obviously this is going to be your platform and your company is going to scale and grow. And as you said, you're an aggregator and you point people in a lot of different directions. And I'm going to give a plug one more time to our resource guides that are available on shemoney.com. We created them, and there's on the 4 different aspects of capital. So just to summarize, knowing what kind of capital is right for your business, how to ask yourself those questions. How do you know if your business is a fit? And then, you know, there's resources, but, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's helpful. And then anchored, especially when anchored in community, and to your point, coming together to support one another, you know, in our ventures, and realizing we all have a role to play in, you know, helping each other, and especially small businesses, be successful. So Steph, I want to end with a big thank you. Check out Fundid. Thank you for joining us today. So many great resources posted in the chat. We're going to end with a little dance off. What do you think? I don't know.
Oh gosh.
I think we could. What time is it? It's 12. It means it's dance time. That's what happens over here at She Money on Tuesdays. Subscribe to the She Money newsletter. Any call out, any ask from you, Steph? Check out Fundid.
Yeah, check out Fundid. Let us know how we could be helpful. We have an Ask an Expert form on our site. So if you have a really specific question that you want to come to me or my team, fill that out and we will jump in and see how we can be helpful.
Thank you, Steph. High five to you, even though you're just like not that far from me. Thanks to the team. Thanks for joining today. Have a great Tuesday.
I love this. You guys get to dance.
She works hard for the money, right, Steph?
That's right. I really do. Feels that way lately.
Everyone, have a great day.